Amara sat quietly in her usual spot in the school cafeteria, the corner near the windows where sunlight streamed in, providing a semblance of warmth and safety. The lunchtime buzz hummed around her as students chatted, laughed, and clattered their trays, but she remained in her bubble, reading a novel she'd picked up from the library. Suddenly, a voice cut through the din like a sharp blade. "Hey, Amara. What's up, Midnight Queen?" She looked up to see Liam, a tall boy with an arrogant smirk plastered across his face, standing a few feet away. His posse of friends flanked him, all grinning maliciously. Amara's stomach tightened. She knew Liam's tone. Mockery was coming. "Don't you ever get tired of being so dark?" he sneered. His words hung in the air, venomous and deliberate. His friends burst into laughter, their voices echoing across the cafeteria. Amara's cheeks burned. She clenched her fists under the table, her pulse racing. She hated moments like these, when her skin became the target of cruel jokes, her identity reduced to something to be ridiculed. "What's the matter?" Liam pressed, taking a step closer. "Cat got your tongue? Or is it just too dark in here for you to see me?" The laughter around him swelled, and a few other students turned to look, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Amara wanted to sink into the ground, to disappear entirely. "You know," one of Liam's friends chimed in, "I heard she's so dark, her reflection's scared of her." More laughter. Amara's vision blurred as tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of them. Leave me alone," she managed to say, her voice trembling. "Oh, the Midnight Queen speaks," Liam mocked, bowing dramatically as his friends clapped and hooted. "Tell us, Your Highness, how does it feel to always blend into the shadows?" Amara's grip tightened on her book, her knuckles turning white. The cafeteria noise faded into the background as her humiliation consumed her. Why was no one stepping in? Why were the teachers oblivious? She scanned the room, hoping for a savior, but most students avoided her gaze, their faces a mixture of pity and discomfort. "Why don't you just go back to wherever you came from?" Another boy shouted from the back, emboldened by the crowd. Amara flinched. She was born here just like them, but that never seemed to matter. She thought of her parents, their advice echoing in her mind. "Hold your head high, Amara. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." But it was hard. It was so hard. The final straw came when Liam grabbed her tray off the table and dumped it onto the floor. "Oops," he said with feigned innocence. "Guess it slipped." "Don't worry, Amara, you probably didn't see it either." Laughter erupted again, and Amara's vision blurred with rage and shame. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and grabbed her bag. She pushed past the jeering crowd, her heart pounding, and left the cafeteria. Behind her, she heard Liam shout, "Don't go, Midnight Queen. We were just having fun." The hallways were mercifully empty as she fled to the nearest bathroom. Locking herself in a stall, Amara let the tears fall freely, her body shaking as she cried. The pain of their words cut deep, reopening wounds that had never fully healed. But amidst her tears, something began to stir, a flicker of defiance. She wasn't sure what she would do, but she knew one thing. This couldn't go on. Not anymore. Amara sat in the bathroom stall, her face wet with tears and her heart heavy. The pain from Liam's words and the laughter of his friends echoed in her mind, each one a fresh sting. But as the minutes ticked by, those feelings began to twist into something else, anger. Why should she keep running? Why should she let them treat her like this? Her parents' words returned to her, stronger now. "Hold your head high. Never let anyone make you feel less than you are." She wiped her face, inhaled deeply, and stood up, her legs trembling but steadying with each breath. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. When Amara re-entered the cafeteria, the buzz of conversation resumed like nothing had happened. Liam was still holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by his laughing friends. They didn't notice her at first as she approached, her footsteps firm and deliberate. Then, someone nudged Liam, and he turned around. His grin faltered when he saw her, but only for a moment. "Back for more, Midnight Queen?" he sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room quieted slightly, the surrounding tables turning their attention to the brewing confrontation. Amara's hands trembled, but she shoved them into her pockets to steady herself. Her voice was calm when she spoke, though it carried a sharp edge that sliced through the air. "Why do you do this, Liam?" she asked, her words deliberate and measured. "Why do you think you're so much better than me?" Liam raised an eyebrow, smirking again. "Because I don't look like I've been dipped in motor oil?" His friends erupted in laughter, but it wasn't as loud this time. The others in the cafeteria seemed uneasy now, watching intently. Amara didn't flinch. She took a step closer. "No, Liam. It's because you're scared. Scared that without tearing someone else down, you'll disappear." The laughter stopped. Liam blinked, caught off guard. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice sharper now. "You humiliate people to feel powerful," Amara continued, her voice steady and rising just enough to carry across the room. "It's like you think making me feel small will somehow make you bigger. But it won't. You're still just you, a boy so desperate for attention that he'll hurt anyone who gets in his way." The cafeteria was dead silent now. All eyes were on Liam, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. His friends exchanged awkward glances, clearly unsure how to react. "You're pathetic," Amara said, her voice cutting like a blade. "You think being cruel makes you strong? All it shows is how weak you are." Liam's face turned red, and he took a step toward her. "You don't know anything about me," he shouted. "You think you can just? Don't I?" Amara interrupted, stepping closer until they were almost nose to nose. Her voice lowered, but it carried an undeniable force. "I know exactly who you are, Liam. You're just a scared little boy who's terrified of being invisible." The room seemed to hold its breath. Liam's hands balled into fists at his sides, but he didn't move. His friends had backed away, no longer smirking or laughing. A few of the other students whispered among themselves, and Amara caught one or two nods in silent agreement. "You know what's really funny?" she said, tilting her head. "You spend all this time trying to tear me down because of my skin. But you'll never have my strength. You'll never have to face the things I do every day and still keep standing." Liam opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. His face twisted with anger and humiliation, his usual confidence shattered. Amara straightened her back and looked him dead in the eyes. "You wanted everyone to see me as less. Now they're all seeing you for what you really are." She turned to walk away, but paused and glanced back over her shoulder. "Oh, and Liam? Midnight isn't something to be ashamed of. It's when the stars shine the brightest." As she left the cafeteria, the room erupted, not in laughter, but in murmurs and scattered applause. Liam stood frozen, his face pale and his fists shaking. Some of his friends quietly drifted away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the room. Amara made her way to her next class, her heart still pounding, but for the first time in a long while, it wasn't from fear. She had stood her ground. And no matter how hard Liam tried to knock her down again, she knew she'd rise every time. The cafeteria buzzed with scattered applause and murmurs of approval as Amara walked away. Her head was high, her stride steady, but her chest still thudded with adrenaline. She refused to look back at Liam, who stood rooted in place, his face a vivid shade of red that deepened with every passing second. His smirk was gone, replaced by a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something even deeper, fear. Liam's friends, the loyal posse that had laughed at every cruel joke and egged him on, began to shift uncomfortably. One by one, they peeled away, muttering half-hearted excuses. "Hey man, I've got class," one said, avoiding eye contact. "Yeah, same," another added, grabbing his tray and slinking off. Within moments, Liam stood alone, the weight of the entire cafeteria's gaze pressing down on him. A few students whispered to each other, their voices carrying just enough for him to hear. About time someone put him in his place. "Did you see his face? Priceless. I always thought he was such a jerk." The humiliation burned hotter than anything Liam had ever felt. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, but no words came to him. The cafeteria doors swung shut behind Amara, and the room was quieter than it had been in years. At one of the far tables, a girl with caramel skin and tightly coiled curls stood up. Her name was Layla, a sophomore who had spent years enduring Liam's cruel taunts about her hair and her Haitian accent. She hesitated for a moment, then started clapping slowly. The sound echoed in the room, and others quickly joined in. Soon, the applause was thunderous, drowning out Liam's sputtering attempts to speak. "Sit down," he finally shouted, his voice cracking. But the clapping only grew louder. "You deserve that, Amara," Layla called out, her voice carrying over the noise. A few students laughed, not at Amara but at Liam. It wasn't the kind of laughter he was used to, the kind that bolstered his ego and made him feel powerful. This laughter was mocking, stripping him of the control he had always wielded so effortlessly. "Shut up," Liam bellowed again, his voice frantic now. "It's not funny." But it was funny, to everyone but him. Near the back of the room, one of the teachers on lunch duty, Mrs. Ruiz, finally intervened. She approached Liam, her arms crossed and her expression stern. "Liam," she said firmly, "you need to sit down and stop yelling." "No." "But," he started, his voice faltering under her glare. "No buts," she snapped. "I've heard enough from you today. And from what I've seen, so has everyone else." Liam's jaw clenched as he slumped into a chair, his face still burning. The teacher's reprimand only added to his humiliation, and the stares of the other students felt like daggers. At the far corner of the cafeteria, Amara's usual table sat empty, her tray still overturned on the floor. A girl from Liam's math class, Chloe, stood up and quietly walked over. She wasn't someone who usually got involved in drama, but something about today felt different. She bent down, picked up the tray, and started cleaning up the mess. "What are you doing?" one of her friends whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Helping," Chloe said simply, her tone resolute. Her small act of kindness sparked something. A few other students followed her lead, picking up the spilled food and wiping down the table. Amara wasn't there to see it, but the message was clear. The tides were shifting. Liam watched this unfold, his humiliation deepening. Every small gesture of solidarity with Amara felt like a slap in the face. He had spent years building his reputation as the king of the cafeteria, the untouchable alpha who could get away with anything. Now, in a matter of minutes, it had all crumbled. And for the first time, he felt the cold sting of being on the outside. Later that day, as Liam walked to his next class, he heard snippets of conversation in the hallways. "Did you see Liam's face? He looked like he was about to cry. Amara totally owned him. I didn't know she had it in her. She's braver than I could ever be." Liam's shoulders hunched as he passed by. He kept his head down, but the voices followed him, weaving through the halls like smoke he couldn't escape. He reached his locker and yanked it open, slamming it shut as soon as he grabbed his books. His heart pounded, and a strange mix of emotions churned in his chest: anger, shame, and something he couldn't quite name. When he entered math class, his usual seat at the back of the room was empty. But as he approached, he noticed a folded piece of paper on the desk. He picked it up and unfolded it, his stomach dropping as he read the single word scrawled across the page: coward. He crumpled the note in his fist, his jaw tightening. Around him, a few students smirked, their faces carefully turned away whenever he tried to meet their eyes. For the rest of the day, Liam couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. His friends avoided him, the cafeteria whispers trailed him, and his usual bravado felt like a distant memory. Meanwhile, Amara walked through the halls with her head held high. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt seen, not as a target or a punchline, but as a person. She wasn't naive, she knew Liam might try to strike back. But for now, she held on to the knowledge that she had stood up for herself, and won. And no matter what came next, she knew she wasn't alone. By the next morning, the entire school was abuzz with the events of the cafeteria showdown. Whispers and murmurs filled the hallways as students shared the story, each recounting Amara's bravery and Liam's humiliation with a mix of admiration and disbelief. "She really stood up to him," one student said near the lockers. "Right in front of everyone," another added, her voice tinged with awe. Liam didn't even know what to say. She called him weak. And she was so calm about it. It wasn't long before the teachers caught wind of the incident. Mrs. Ruiz, who had witnessed the exchange, brought it up in the staff room during her morning coffee. "This has gone on long enough," she said firmly, setting her mug down with a sharp clink. "Liam's behavior isn't just bullying, it's hateful. We need to address it head-on." The principal, Mr. Collins, nodded gravely. "Agreed. We'll incorporate discussions about respect and inclusivity into homeroom sessions immediately. And Liam will be dealt with?" Meanwhile, Liam slouched in his seat during first-period math, trying to make himself as invisible as possible. Gone was the cocky grin he usually wore. His classmates avoided him, whispering behind their hands or giving him fleeting, judgmental glances. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him, and it made his skin crawl. Layla, sitting 2 rows behind him, exchanged a pointed look with Chloe. Both girls had been deeply impacted by Amara's courage. They hadn't realized how much they needed someone to speak out until they saw it happen. "Someone had to do it," Layla whispered, leaning toward Chloe. "It's about time Liam got knocked off his pedestal." Chloe nodded. "It's not just about him, though. It's the whole culture. People like him think they can say whatever they want, and no one will stop them." Liam's ears burned as he caught snippets of their conversation. He gritted his teeth, his shame bubbling into a toxic mix of anger and resentment. He wasn't used to being the one on the receiving end of ridicule. The next class was homeroom, and to everyone's surprise, the teacher, Mrs. Taylor, began the session with a discussion about respect and inclusivity. She stood at the front of the room, her expression serious. "Yesterday, something significant happened in this school," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "A student stood up against prejudice and hate. And while I'm proud of their courage, it's clear we need to do better as a community." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. Amara, sitting near the back, kept her eyes on her notebook, feeling both embarrassed and empowered by the sudden spotlight. Mrs. Taylor continued, "I want us to talk about why this behavior happens and how we can combat it. How can we create a school where everyone feels respected and valued?" Layla raised her hand. "By calling it out when we see it. What Amara did yesterday, she didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for all of us." The class nodded in agreement, and a few students even clapped softly. Amara glanced up, her cheeks flushing with a mix of pride and discomfort. She hadn't intended to become a symbol of resistance, but it seemed that's what was happening. Liam shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the attention making him feel cornered. He wanted to lash out, to defend himself, but he knew anything he said would only make things worse. Instead, he stared at his desk, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. As the day went on, the school's administration took further action. Posters about inclusivity and combating prejudice appeared on bulletin boards, and teachers incorporated lessons on empathy and respect into their classes. Even the morning announcements included a segment on the importance of standing against hate. Liam's name was never mentioned, but everyone knew who these initiatives were targeting. The weight of it was unbearable. In the cafeteria, he found himself eating alone for the first time in years. His once loyal friends avoided his table, their allegiance now shifting toward the rising wave of solidarity against bullying. Meanwhile, Amara's world had changed as well. Students she barely knew began approaching her in the hallways, offering quiet words of support. "Hey, Amara, what you did yesterday was amazing," one girl said, her voice shy but sincere. "You're an inspiration," said another. "Thank you for speaking up." Amara accepted their praise with a quiet nod, still adjusting to her newfound visibility. She appreciated their words, but she couldn't help feeling a mix of emotions, pride, yes, but also a lingering sense of vulnerability. She knew standing up to Liam was just the beginning. During lunch, she returned to her usual table near the windows, but this time, she wasn't alone. Layla and Chloe joined her, their presence a silent testament to the change she had sparked. The 3 girls ate together, their conversation easy and filled with laughter. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt a sense of belonging. But the ripple effects of her actions didn't stop there. In the days that followed, more students began to speak out. Layla shared her own experiences of being teased for her hair, and Chloe recounted the times she had been mocked for her weight. Their stories, once hidden, now flowed freely, creating a collective strength that began to reshape the school's culture. For Liam, the fallout was relentless. His reputation as the king of the cafeteria was gone, replaced by a new identity, the bully who got owned. He overheard students mocking him in the hallways, their words sharp and unkind. "Hey, Liam," one boy said sarcastically, "feeling strong today, or do you need to pick on someone smaller?" Another added, "Careful, he might trip over his ego." Liam's world, once so secure, had crumbled. And while part of him simmered with anger, another part, a quieter, more vulnerable part, began to question everything. Why had he been so cruel? Why had he felt the need to tear others down? These thoughts gnawed at him, but he wasn't ready to face them yet. Amara, however, was ready to keep moving forward. She knew the fight against prejudice wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, she and her newfound allies were building something stronger, a community where everyone had a voice and no one had to stand alone. During lunch the next day, Amara sat at her usual table, now shared with Layla and Chloe. The air felt lighter with their laughter and easy conversation, but Amara's thoughts were pulled back to the previous day's events. The cafeteria seemed quieter than usual, almost subdued, as though the tension Liam had once thrived on had dissipated in his absence. Halfway through her meal, a shadow fell over the table. Amara looked up to see Sophie, one of Liam's closest friends. She stood hesitantly, clutching the strap of her backpack, her face flushed with discomfort. "Hi, Amara," Sophie began, her voice barely above a whisper. The chatter at the table quieted, and Layla's expression hardened. Chloe raised an eyebrow, waiting to see what Sophie had to say. Amara, surprised, set down her fork and met Sophie's gaze. Sophie glanced nervously at Layla and Chloe before continuing. "Can I talk to you for a minute? Alone?" Layla folded her arms. "But, got something to defend about your friend Liam?" Sophie flinched at the accusation but shook her head. "No, it's not about that. I just need to talk to Amara." Amara looked at Layla and Chloe, her expression soft but steady. "It's okay. I'll hear her out." The two girls exchanged wary glances but nodded. Sophie gestured toward an empty corner of the cafeteria, and Amara followed her, leaving her tray behind. Once they were out of earshot, Sophie wrung her hands together, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, Amara. I'm so sorry for everything. For laughing, for not stopping him, for being part of it." Amara crossed her arms, her face unreadable. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she hadn't anticipated this. "Why now?" she asked, her tone even. "Why apologize now after everything that's happened?" Sophie hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears. "Because I should have done it sooner. Watching you stand up to Liam, seeing how brave you were, it made me realize how wrong I've been. I knew what he was doing was cruel, but I laughed anyway. I didn't stop him because I didn't want to be the next target." Amara's heart softened, though her expression remained guarded. "And now that everyone's turned against him, you feel safe apologizing?" Sophie winced at the bluntness but nodded. "Yes. And I hate that it took me this long to speak up. I hate that I let him hurt you, Layla, Chloe, so many people. I didn't have the courage to stand up to him, but you did. You showed me that it's possible." Amara studied her, searching for any trace of insincerity, but all she saw was genuine remorse. She sighed and uncrossed her arms. "Sophie, admitting your mistakes is the first step. It's not easy to face what you've done, and it's even harder to change. But words aren't enough. If you really mean this, you need to do better. Not just with me, but with everyone." Sophie nodded eagerly, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "I will. I swear I will. I don't want to be that person anymore." Amara's lips curved into a small, cautious smile. "Then start now." Sophie exhaled shakily and wiped her eyes. "Thank you, Amara. For forgiving me, for listening, for everything." Amara didn't reply immediately. Instead, she gestured for Sophie to return to her table, silently inviting her to share lunch with them. Sophie hesitated, looking over at Layla and Chloe, who were watching with varying degrees of skepticism. Amara placed a hand on Sophie's arm. "Come on. If you're serious about change, you can start by facing them." Together, they walked back to the table. Layla's brow furrowed as Sophie approached, and Chloe crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "What's this about?" Layla asked, her tone sharp. "Sophie wants to apologize," Amara said simply, taking her seat. She gestured for Sophie to sit as well. Sophie hesitated but eventually lowered herself onto the edge of the bench. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm sorry. To all of you. I laughed when I should have stopped him. I stood by and did nothing, and that was wrong. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to do better." Layla narrowed her eyes, leaning forward. "You think one apology makes up for years of letting him tear people down? For the things he said about my hair, my accent? For the things you said?" Sophie's face crumpled. "No, I don't. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can try to be better. I'm done with Liam. I'm done being part of that." Layla stared at her for a long moment before leaning back with a sigh. "We'll see. Words are easy. It's actions that count." Sophie nodded earnestly. "I'll prove it to you." The table fell into an uneasy silence before Chloe finally spoke. "Well, I guess you've got a long way to go, but maybe you're on the right path." Sophie managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." As they finished their lunch, the tension slowly began to ease. Sophie still looked nervous, but she made an effort to join the conversation, her demeanor humble and respectful. Amara noticed the shift and felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Sophie's apology wasn't just words. But she also knew change wouldn't happen overnight. Sophie had a long road ahead of her, and the scars Liam had left wouldn't fade easily. Still, as Amara looked around the table at her new friends, and at Sophie, who was trying to make amends, she felt a sense of something new forming. Strength, solidarity, and the beginnings of a school where no one would have to stand alone again. The cafeteria wasn't the same. Conversations were softer, laughter less biting. It wasn't just about Liam anymore. Something had shifted in the school's atmosphere. Students were thinking more carefully about their words and actions. The mocking jokes and casual put-downs that once floated freely were now met with awkward silences or hesitant glances. Amara noticed it most during the mornings when she walked down the hallway. Once, she'd been invisible, or worse, a target for whispers and stares. Now, the whispers had a different tone. "There she is," someone murmured as she passed. "She really changed things," another added, nodding subtly in her direction. Amara would have flushed with embarrassment weeks ago, but now, she held her head high. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as an outsider, but as someone with value. Liam, meanwhile, was a shadow of his former self. The once loud, cocky boy now sat in the back of his classes, his head down and his voice muted. He barely spoke, even when called on by teachers, and the students who used to hang on his every word now avoided him. During lunch, he sat alone at a table in the farthest corner of the cafeteria. The usual crowd of admirers was gone, replaced by a steady stream of indifferent glances and quiet judgment. A few students still whispered about him, but their words were no longer admiring. "Look at him," someone muttered. "Big, tough Liam. Not so tough now, huh?" Amara caught these comments as she passed, and while part of her felt vindicated, another part felt a twinge of something else, pity. Liam had brought this on himself, but seeing him so isolated made her wonder if he had ever truly understood the harm he'd caused. In the days that followed, the school administration ramped up their efforts to address the issue. Assemblies on respect and inclusivity were held, and homeroom sessions were filled with discussions about empathy and understanding. Teachers encouraged students to share their experiences, and for the first time, Amara felt like her voice was part of a larger conversation. During one of these sessions, Mrs. Taylor stood at the front of the room, her expression warm but serious. "I want to thank those of you who've shared your stories," she began, glancing meaningfully at Amara and Layla. "It takes courage to speak out, and it's a reminder that words have power, power to hurt, but also power to heal." Layla raised her hand, and Mrs. Taylor nodded for her to speak. "I think we've all been guilty of saying things without thinking about how they affect people," she said, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about words. It's about how we treat each other every day. It's about choosing kindness over cruelty." The room was silent as her words sank in. Amara glanced around, noticing how even the quieter students seemed engaged. She felt a swell of pride, Not just for Layla, but for all of them. This was what change looked like. After class, Sophie approached Amara in the hallway, her expression tentative but hopeful. "Hey," she said, falling into step beside her. "I wanted to say thank you again. For giving me a chance." Amara smiled softly. "You're earning it. Keep it up." Sophie nodded, her face brightening. "I will. I promise." The two of them walked together for a while, their conversation light and easy. Amara still felt the weight of everything that had happened, but moments like this made it feel worth it. She was no longer walking alone. Liam, however, continued to struggle. One afternoon, Amara spotted him in the library, sitting by himself with his head bent over a notebook. He didn't notice her as she passed, but she couldn't help observing how small and defeated he looked. She wondered if he was reflecting on his actions, or simply retreating from the consequences. Later that week, during another homeroom discussion, Mrs. Taylor asked a question that hung heavy in the air. "What does it mean to take responsibility for our mistakes?" The room was quiet for a long moment before Chloe spoke up. "It means owning up to what we've done and trying to fix it. But I think it also means being willing to listen when people tell us we've hurt them." Amara nodded, feeling the truth of Chloe's words. Taking responsibility wasn't just about apologizing, it was about making things right, even when it was hard. For Liam, it seemed the journey toward responsibility was still a long way off. He remained quiet and withdrawn, his usual bravado replaced by a sullen silence. But there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when he seemed to be grappling with something deeper. One afternoon, as Amara walked past the empty art room, she heard a voice call her name. She turned to see Liam standing in the doorway, his face pale and uncertain. "Amara," he said, his voice low. Can I talk to you?" Amara hesitated, her instincts warning her to be cautious. But something in Liam's expression, something raw and unguarded, made her stop. She crossed her arms and waited. Liam looked down, struggling for words. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." His words were quiet, almost inaudible, but they carried a weight that made Amara pause. She studied him for a long moment, her emotions swirling. "Sorry for what?" she asked finally. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. Liam swallowed hard. "For the things I said. The way I treated you. I know I can't take it back, but I'm trying to figure out how to be better." Amara regarded him carefully, searching for sincerity. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she could see the cracks in his armor. Whether they were genuine or just another attempt to regain control, she couldn't say. "Trying isn't enough," she said, her voice steady. "It's a start, but it's not enough. You have to prove it to Liam. Not to me, but to everyone you hurt." He nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I know." Amara didn't offer forgiveness, but she didn't turn away, either. As she walked out of the art room, she felt a mixture of emotions, vindication, sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope. Change was possible, but it wasn't guaranteed. Liam had a long way to go, and the road ahead would be anything but easy. For Amara, the journey was different. She no longer felt like an outcast, and her voice was no longer ignored. She had found strength in herself and in others. And for the first time, she believed the school could be a place where everyone belonged. Amara's story rippled through the school, its impact undeniable. What had started as a confrontation in the cafeteria grew into a movement of introspection and change. Students, teachers, and even parents began having conversations they had long avoided. For many, it was the first time they truly confronted the silent prejudices and assumptions lurking in their community. At first, the change seemed almost imperceptible, like a faint breeze brushing through the halls. People began choosing their words more carefully. The casual jabs and offhand insults that once flew freely diminished, replaced by quieter, more thoughtful exchanges. But as days turned into weeks, the shift became undeniable. Amara had ignited something the school couldn't ignore. In English class, Mrs. Ruiz introduced a new assignment, a reflective essay on respect and empathy. It wasn't just an exercise in writing but an opportunity for students to examine their own actions and biases. Layla volunteered to share her essay first. Standing at the front of the room, she clutched her paper, her voice steady but charged with emotion. I used to think staying quiet was the best way to survive, she began, her eyes scanning the room. When people made fun of my hair or my accent, I thought ignoring it was the only way to protect myself. But watching Amara stand up to Liam made me realize something. Silence doesn't protect you. It only gives power to the people trying to hurt you. Her words hung in the air, the weight of them pressing down on the class. Amara sat in the back, her chest tightening as she listened. Layla's courage mirrored her own, and for the first time, Amara saw just how far-reaching her actions had been. When Layla finished, the class erupted in applause. Even the quieter students clapped, their expressions thoughtful. Liam sat slumped in his seat, his face unreadable. He hadn't spoken much since the cafeteria incident, but his silence now felt heavier, more introspective. The changes weren't limited to the classroom. In the cafeteria, where social hierarchies once ruled, new dynamics were forming. Amara's usual table had grown, with Layla, Chloe, and even Sophie joining her regularly. Their conversations were lively, filled with laughter and support, but they also tackled difficult topics head-on. One afternoon, as the group shared stories about their experiences, Sophie hesitated before speaking. I used to think Liam's jokes were just jokes, she admitted, her voice trembling. I told myself they didn't mean anything. But I see now that they did. They hurt people, and I was part of that. I laughed when I should have said something. I'm sorry. Chloe, ever blunt, arched an eyebrow. It's a good thing you're realizing that now. But you've got to do more than apologize. I know, Sophie said, her cheeks flushing. I'm trying. Really I am. Amara watched the exchange silently, her emotions conflicted. Sophie's remorse seemed genuine, but trust wasn't something Amara gave easily. Not anymore. Still, she appreciated the effort. It was more than she had expected. Across the cafeteria, Liam sat alone, his tray untouched. He glanced at Amara's table, his expression shadowed by something unspoken. It wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was something deeper, shame, perhaps, or regret. But whatever it was, he kept it to himself. The administration continued its efforts to address the issues Amara's stand had brought to light. Posters promoting inclusivity and anti-bullying initiatives adorned the walls, and the school hosted a special assembly on racism and respect. Amara was invited to speak but declined, feeling unprepared for such a public role. Instead, Layla took the stage. Her speech was heartfelt and unflinching, addressing the pain of being judged for something as intrinsic as skin color or the way someone spoke. We can't change the past, she said, her voice steady. But we can choose how we move forward. We can be better. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the gymnasium. Amara sat in the audience, her heart swelling with pride. Layla's words had captured everything she wanted to say but couldn't. As the weeks passed, Amara found herself reflecting on her journey. What had begun as a moment of anger and defiance had grown into something far larger than herself. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just a girl who had finally had enough. But the impact of her actions was undeniable. Liam, too, seemed to be grappling with the fallout. He was no longer the loud, overconfident boy who had ruled the cafeteria. Instead, he moved through the halls like a ghost, his presence muted and his arrogance stripped away. One afternoon, as Amara walked past the art room, she saw him sitting at a table, sketching furiously. The room was empty except for him, and for a moment, she hesitated. Then, summoning her courage, she stepped inside. Liam, she said, her voice breaking the silence. He looked up, startled. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed. Amara, he said quietly. She crossed her arms, her gaze steady. What are you drawing? He hesitated, then turned the sketchpad toward her. It was a portrait, unfinished but unmistakably her. The lines were sharp, capturing both strength and vulnerability. Amara stared at it, unsure of what to say. I've been thinking about what you said, Liam murmured. About strength and weakness. I was wrong. About a lot of things. Amara didn't respond immediately. She studied him, searching for sincerity. Finally, she nodded. Keep thinking. And keep doing better. Liam nodded, his gaze falling back to his sketchpad. As Amara turned to leave, she felt a strange sense of closure. Liam's journey was his own, but for the first time, she believed he might actually be trying to change. In the months that followed, Amara continued to find her voice. She joined the school's diversity council, working with teachers and students to foster a more inclusive environment. Layla, Chloe, and Sophie became her closest allies, their bond forged through shared struggle and mutual support. The school wasn't perfect, change never was. But it was better. And for Amara, that was enough. She had faced the storm and come out stronger, her story a testament to the power of truth and resilience. And as she walked through the halls, her head held high, she knew she would never be invisible again.